Hi, welcome to the Werdenberg Family Farm with Dawn and Brenda. A lot of you said you wanted to tour our barn, and today's your lucky day.
But this is a working barn, and it's a mess right now, so we need a few minutes to clean up. So come and join us. So today we're going to give you some detail on our barn. It's known as a Pennsylvania bank barn, or some of the historians would call it a 4-bay Pennsylvania barn. But most farmers around here, we just call them bank barns. The two distinctive features of the two-story barn, if you look in the front, that's the 4-bay. But again, none of the farmers call it a 4-bay. They all call it an overshoot. But it's a cantilever, and it goes 6 foot out over the wall. And then on the opposite side, it's either built into an embankment or it has a ramp. And ours has a ramp that takes you up into the hay mows. So it's a 2-story barn. The upper levels are storage of grain, hay, and straw. And the lower level is for the animals. And we're going to show you all that. Now, typically these barns came from Europe, from both Germany and Switzerland, where the agricultural architecture of the time had homes with the cantilever. So when these farmers immigrated to the US, they used that same architecture to build their barns. So these barns were typically built between 1790 and 1890. So we have a 100-year frame that we need to figure out where this thing falls in place. I suspect it's toward the latter part of that time, but come with me and I'll show you the best single way to identify the age of a barn. You come in here, you can see the big beautiful stone walls and the troughs, but right on the floor here is your best single source of identifying the age of a barn. And you can see into the concrete, built 1885. Now when it was built, it didn't have a concrete floor. So you can see they marked it that they concreted the lower floor in 1914. So this was built at the very end of the period where they were building these Pennsylvania barns. So let's take a closer look at one of the distinguishing features in the front of the barn, the 4-bay. Now this is the open 4-bay, and if you look, you can see underneath that these heavy oak hewn beams cantilever 6 feet over, and that's the typical style, 6 feet. Again, farmers just call it an overshoot. And for us, it's a terrific thing because they build these barns typically facing southeast, and the wind comes from the opposite direction. So the cows and animals like to come out. If it's really cold and windy, they'll come over, and this is the leeward side of the barn, and they'll get the protection from the wind, and then they also will get the south sun so they can stay warm. Though the barnyard here is on the south side, which keeps less ice and melt. So a really smart use of the situation with the sun and the weather.
And while it doesn't look like much right now, right there's where the farm stand is in the summer.
Okay, we're going to walk in the lower area of the barn. Again, it's meant for animals, so come on in. You can see passing through the overshoot. And as we come inside, I'd like you to notice several things. First, we know that these beams are, over 130 years old. They're in amazing shape. They're all oak and they're hand hewn. You can see the marks here for where they chopped and cleaned them up. Now, this is a magnificent beam right here. This is almost 40 feet long. It's a single piece of oak. And again, hand hewn, chopped, and it supports the weight of the whole barn running down. There are two major oak beams that go the opposite direction of the smaller oak beams, or this case, a big joist. If you look closely at the wood, either on the planks or there, you can see the remnants from the whitewash. So years ago, they would spray this mixture of lime and water all through the animal area of the barn, which acted as a disinfectant and it kept it clean, particularly if it was a dairy barn, dairy operation. So we're preparing this area. Next year we'd like to get goats, and on the opposite side is where we have the feeding and for our Angus cattle. If you look over here on the side, you can see this is where they would feed the hay. Now, interesting, if you look at this, it's a square, and look at this one, how worn out it is. That's from 130 years of animals reaching up through to pull the hay and licking on it, and that's oak. So this one must have broke and was replaced. But this is how thin they got from all that wear. And then down below would put the grain. Again, this part is not in use now, but we're going to get it ready for goats. Now, goats are escape artists, so we have to think of every way possible for them to escape from either the inside or the outside. The previous farmer used this for raising hogs and pigs, and there are several pens here, and we're going to convert it to goats, as I said earlier. What I find fascinating are these stone walls and how they have a parchment layer over them. They're 20-inch stone walls, and you look at the sills, which are oak, and these are all original windows and sills. Pretty amazing. Again, looking at the overshoot area, or they call the forebay, it's in great shape. And this is a piece of lumber that I admire greatly. They had an old farmer in that really knew his wood, and this is a piece of pin oak. It's almost 24 inches wide, and it was used, again, with the cutouts here to hold boards to keep the animals in. The other thing that fascinates me about the whole barn is the way they connected the major structural elements. You can see just one piece over here with the mortise and tenon. We're still on the first floor of the barn, and we're right underneath the granary. You can see above when they would store the wheat or other grains, and they would have it come down through the chute and fill the bags right here. They could tie the bags up, and they put it on this scale. This is an antique scale, but it's from the Howe Scale Company, and it can measure or weigh 100-pound bags. So they would tie them off, and then if they were selling them, they could put them right out here, load them onto the wagon.
And what's that door behind you there?
And that is the root cellar for the barn. And it's a very large root cellar, but it needs a lot of work. So we're not going to go in there today. Looks like our cattle just came in, so let's go ahead and feed them.
There's Buddy. This is Rosie. This is the one who's going to have a calf for us. Hopefully in February or March. They're happy now.
Okay, they designed these barns to have sections that are for the animals, and then they have the walkway for the farmers and for the service area. So we're in one of the walkways now. Makes it very convenient. We're on the opposite side now of the feeding area that we showed you before. Here we can put hay, put it up top, and then you can see the slats. So they reach in from the other side, but again, this is the service area. So we put hay up top, and then we put some grain in these feeding bins. These bins are all original with the barn, so we do not want to replace them. We'd like to keep them just as they are. Okay, now we're in the connection between the barn and the silo. The silo was built 40 to 50 years after the original barn. But come on in here. You can get a sense of the silo, which is a poured reinforced concrete, and you can see the rail to climb up the whole way. And they have these planks in here, which they would fill it with silage. And silage is typically chopped corn, and it's the whole corn plant, the stalk, the leaf, and the corn ear itself. When it would fill the silo, and typically it would ferment, and then it could last for a long time. And the cows love the fermented silage. Okay, well now we're back outside. I'm going to look a little more detail about the silo. This is a very well built silo. Again, it was built probably 50 years after the original barn. It's with poured reinforced concrete, very modern for the time. So for us to figure the height, we counted there's 15 sections and they're each 3 feet. So that's 45 feet, the height of the silo. This silo is never coming down. I'll show you another architectural feature here that supports our date of 1885 for the barn. If you look over the window, there's a single piece of limestone for the lintels. They didn't start using concrete lintels until 1920 because they didn't have Portland cement to make it strong enough. So they had to use a stone in order to act as the lintel. Okay, these Pennsylvania bank barns were either built into an embankment, or if they didn't have one, then they had a ramp. So we have a ramp here, so come on up the ramp and we'll go into the second floor. I love these two, the barn doors, original. And we can see when the barn was painted. You'll notice this barn is broken into 3 bays. A bank barn typically has 16 to 18 foot wide bays, and these are 18. The center bay is the wagon bay. It's built with a heavier structure and heavier planks. They're usually 1.5 to 2 inches thick, and they're tongue and groove. The bays on either side are the hay mows. So the equipment mow in the center, hay mows on either side. So it typically could be hay or straw. When the barn was built, they didn't have any kind of bales, round bales or square bales. They would, in the field, would load the hay with a pitchfork onto a wagon with horses, and then they would bring it into the barn. And then they had to unload it from the wagon to one of the 2 hay mows. And they would typically load it pretty much up near the top. Now that was a difficult task because they would either use a sling with ropes, fill it, and then they would run a rope at the top, and there's a block and tackle up there now. Or they would have a grappling or hooks that would grab the hay and use the rope and pull it over. Or if they didn't have any of that, they would have to tough it out and just with a pitchfork. So tough work putting the hay for the season. Right now in the center bay, the equipment mow, I have our old hay wagon. And in the front there, I'm using it to store our round bales. These barns right now are not ideal for storing hay and equipment with the modern equipment and the weight of the heavy bales and equipment. Our tractor is a lighter weight tractor, so this barn floor can handle it, and it can handle the weight of the smaller round bales. Let's look at some of the architectural features in the wood in the barn. Okay, now we're going to take a closer look at the architecture inside the barn. Isn't this magnificent? It's in great shape, and all the prior owners kept rain from going in, and we have no damage. Remember, this was built without the use of cranes or even bolts. Here you can see mortise and tenon with the heavy posts and pegs to keep them in place. If we look at the overall structure at the very top of the roof, let's look at the rafters. There are 23 sets of rafters that go from the ridge peak at the highest part of the roof all the way down to the lowest part of the roof. And they support the nailing strips which the wood shake shingles were nailed to. Now the rafters are in turn supported by purlins. There are 4 sets of purlins that hold up all of the rafters. You can see the purlins on the outside are held up by the posts, the end posts. But inside there are 2 queen posts at an angle that take the weight from the purlin and transfer it to the posts in the center of the barn. Next, as we go down the truss, you can see the tie beams. In this case, we have 2 tie beams. And they're very clever, and this was built at the later period of the Pennsylvania barn, and they had an opening in the upper tie beam so that hay could easily be transferred from the equipment mow in the center over to the hay mows on either end. This is a magnificent view of the whole superstructure that shows all of the purlins, beams, and tie beams. We already talked about one of the primary characteristics of the Pennsylvania barn with the open forebay, and you can see that to the left in the lower area. But the other key characteristic is the roof line. In the Pennsylvania barn, we have symmetry in the roof line, where the predecessor barn was the Schweitzer barn, and it was typically built from 1750 up to about 1850. And the key there is not symmetry. The roof line was longer over the forebay. Another critical element of construction in any barn, not just a Pennsylvania barn, is the key selection of the cornerstones. The cornerstones are placed properly, and then the walls are built between it. Here you can see the magnificent stones with the faces on 2 planes to give a beautiful corner. Another interesting characteristic here is that they used glass windows on 3 of the 4 sides of the barn. Now this side is the part of the barn where the cattle are now, and it faces south. And very seldom do we get any wind or any storms from the south that would blow the precipitation or snow in these windows. So they keep them open so we have good source of ventilation. Now, if you look closely at the window, you can see that the cows defy gravity sometimes with their placement of the cow chips. Also, if you look closely, you can see that these louvers are the original with the barn, and they do need painted now. If you look at some of the original glass in the barn, it's beautiful with the wavy glass. It's almost 140 years old. Just want to show a feature of this door. Again, it's an original door. You can see with the cross members and the structure. But this is the mechanism that holds the door closed. And it's a simple pin in the center, and it slides back and forth. And that corresponds to a groove in the wood right here. When it locks, that 2x4 just slides into that piece right there, and it holds the door shut. Pennsylvania bank barns typically have 2 granary rooms in it, and this one does as well. I'm going to open up here. Oh, there's Buddy the cat. You can see inside here, we don't really have lights, but this is a small room, and if you recall from down below, this is where we had the chute that came out of this room and went below. They would fill this up. There are slots in these posts where they would put individual boards and they could fill up the grain, and then they would just continue to stack one board on top of each other to fill them up. And then with a shovel, they could shovel it into the hole. And I don't know if you can see right here or not. In the floor, there's the hole, and that's what goes, they just would shovel it in. Now right now, there's still grain on the floor, but at this point it's mostly just hulls
The mice have taken care of that.
over the years, because we haven't used it in the last few years. Another feature of the Pennsylvania Bank Barn is the hay hole. And right here, this drops hay down to the first floor, right into the service area, right next to the feeding troughs. So, Buddy the cat, I don't want to knock you down in there, but here we go. I'm going to drop one down. Sometimes it scares the cows down there when they hear a big thud. Now we're in the hay mow now. What's interesting is a lot of folks don't know the difference between hay and straw. Sometimes they call me, they want to buy some straw or they want to buy some hay, and I always ask them, what are you using it for, and explain. But I want to show you, if you look closer here, we have two different types of hay and straw. This is straw. It is used for animal bedding. Straw is the plant shaft for wheat. There's little or no nutritional value in it. It's very light, and the animals love to lay on it, but they won't eat it unless they need some roughage. You can see the color and consistency of it. Here is some hay. This hay has some seed heads in it, and it's a mixture of plant stems with seed heads and some grass. This is a first cutting of hay, typically in the spring, and that's when the plants shoot up stems and have seeds. This is a lower quality of hay because it's very stemmy and it's not as tasty, I guess. And the cows know, they sniff it and they can tell the difference. Here is a premium hay. You can see that it's all just soft, long grass blades that are dried and still has a little bit of green color. They love this kind of hay. You have to be careful not to put really green and wet hay in your barn because it can heat up and spontaneously ignite. Most of our animal feed is hay that's in the round bales. Those bales each are 500 or 600 pounds apiece. If you move over to the side here, you can see we have storage area for bedding, and this is the straw. Now, in order to get it to the lower level, there's an opening in the front of the barn. We just throw it down. And finally, we also have some hay that's in the small bales. And this is first cutting hay. So it's a little pricklier, and they don't like it as much. But in the middle of winter, when they don't have anything else, they will enjoy this. If you look at the underside of the roof, you can see that it's wood shake shingles, and they typically last 80 to 100 years. Now, as they deteriorated, and you can see some holes in it in places, a standing seam metal roof was placed over that to make sure that the barn didn't suffer any water damage. And we're back in the other hay mow, and it's mostly empty. If you look at the floorboards, because this is just hay, you can see they're not attached, and that's intentional. They wanted to have looser boards, so when they put the loose hay over top, the theory was that it could get a little bit of air working its way up through the slats. So each one of these is loose the whole way. It's only attached at either end. Now, we have some older boards that are original that are damaged, so my son and I are going to put new oak flooring over this section. Well, thank you for joining us on our barn tour. I've only been using this barn for about 3 years now, and I've learned a lot, and I've also learned to appreciate the heritage of those that built these barns and used these barns over the years. I did some reading about the Pennsylvania barn by Robert Ensminger, and if you want to learn more, it's a great resource. I'm also particularly interested in hearing from you, those of you that have worked in barns and that know more about barns than I do, to send me a note and comment, and we can learn together. But I look forward to continuing to maintain this barn, to maintain the heritage and the history of the Pennsylvania farmers. Thank you for joining us.